visit by a mayor of New York is always considered significant. Where would you go first? Mr. Cuomo?
Given the hostility and the anti-Semitism that has been shown in New York, I would go to Israel.
Mr. Tilson, where would you go?
Yeah, I'd make my 4th trip to Israel, followed by my 5th trip to Ukraine, 2 of our greatest allies fighting on the front lines of the global war on terror.
Mr. Mamdani?
I would stay in New York City. My plans are to address New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs and focus on that.
Mr. Mamdani, can I just jump in? Would you visit Israel as mayor?
I will be doing, as the mayor, I'll be standing up for Jewish New Yorkers, and I'll be meeting them wherever they are across the 5 boroughs, whether that's in their synagogues and temples or at their homes or at the subway platform, because ultimately we need to focus on delivering on their concerns.
And just yes or no, do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
I believe Israel has the right to exist.
Not
as a Jewish state?
As a state with equal rights.
He won't say it has a right to exist as a Jewish state. Be very clear.
And his answer was no, he won't visit Israel.
I said that.
That's what he was trying to say.
No. Unlike you, I answer questions very directly.
All right,
and I want to be very clear. I believe every state should be a state of equal rights.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mamdani.
Yeah, disturbing, inflammatory stuff. Zoran Mamdani just disgustingly comes out in favor of equal rights for everyone who lives everywhere in the world, that every country should have equal rights for its citizens. Obviously, we here at GTA see that as disturbing and disqualifying, and hope that this monster doesn't get elected mayor tomorrow.
Hey, Ben, actually, could I just jump in here and see if you're down to take like an oath that you're allegiant to our ally Israel? I just want to jump in here and clarify for everyone.
Well, we were talking about the New York mayoral election. I really don't see the relevance.
Just answer the question. He won't say it. He won't say it, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. So I am Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined after a couple of weeks of undisclosed activities in Alaska by our super producer, Jake Appett, and as always, by our graphic designer, J. Andrew World. So we just got a little snippet of what's going on with the New York mayoral race, and obviously we do have other things that we want to cover before the main event tonight. But I think this is going to be on a lot of people's minds right now. Certainly in New York, where I know a fair number of our viewers live, and around the country. Now, if you were undecided about who to vote for tomorrow, I know it's complicated. New York has ranked choice voting, so it's you don't just have to come up with one name, right? It's a whole decision matrix. But the National Review has stepped in to offer some clarity on this. Yeah, I know, right? It's like everybody was just holding their breath, waiting to hear what the National Review thought. So this is just signed the editors, right? So it's a collective statement of the magazine. So this is, all the editors at the National Review and probably the ghost of William F. Buckley all signed off on this thing. The title, as you saw there, is Zoran Mamdani is a public menace, which is just J. Jonah Jameson-esque.
I feel like he should be like whoever wrote that headline just should be slamming their fist on the table, demanding pictures of Zoran.
Exactly. So before we move on to other subjects, I did just want to go through this because I don't know. Look, I will admit that this is a perverse fascination that I have with stuff like National Review editorials. That a lot of this really should be left to refute itself. But I have this disease, so let's just do this. Let's take a look at the text of this National Review editorial. Zoran Mamdani is a public menace. It's not very long. It's just 6 paragraphs. So it starts out with a little apology for the fact that they're doing this. It says, National Review is not typically in the habit of weighing in on Democratic primary races. But even if we were not founded, headquartered in New York, the fate of the world's most important city would still matter to us, as it does to America. Therefore, decency requires us to state the obvious. Zoran Mamdani, the 33-year-old progressive candidate in tomorrow's election for the Democratic mayoral nomination, belongs on nobody's ballot, whether ranked first, fifth, or 100th. Okay. Now, personally, I don't find it that shocking. The National Review would essentially be endorsing Andrew Cuomo, which is, in effect, I mean, there are two guys who have a chance of winning. This is an editorial about how you shouldn't vote for one of them. I don't think it takes a genius to connect those dots. And they're essentially saying in this first paragraph, well, this is weird for us, right? That we're de facto endorsing somebody in a Democratic race. I don't actually think it's that weird, considering that Cuomo is being backed by a bunch of donors who also donated to Trump. And anyone whose memory is long enough to remember that Andrew Cuomo, this is actually a fun piece of trivia, used to be the governor of New York. Should really look into why he stopped. But in any case, when he was governor, I mean, he spent years doing his best to stymie the state Democratic Party from getting anything done by backing something called the Independent Democratic Caucus, IDC, which was basically a subset of Democrats in the state legislature who would consistently vote with Republicans. So really, I don't think it's quite as much of a man bites dog story as they're portraying it as. That in a choice between that and a Democratic Socialist, the National Review would have opinions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the slate of the IDC are the ones that Kamala Harris was trying to win over, win her rightward shift to become president. I think that might be the only Republican she won over.
And I don't want to derail us too much, but if you're interested in our little city's politics, it's interesting to look. Jessica Ramos was one of the people who primaried the IDC members on behalf of, because they weren't real Democrats, quote unquote, which worked. And now in this race, Jessica Ramos ran for mayor and then was not doing very well, and then came out and actually endorsed Cuomo. So if you're looking to look into the deep heart of cynicism of certain politicians, that's a good place to start. And then she's wondering why most, she's still posting like TikToks with like upbeat music about her endorsing Cuomo, and all the comments are just furious. She doesn't understand.
Is she like pointing to text on the screen?
Yeah. Like, why I endorse
vote for Cuomo.
And then I think because in this race, because of ranked choice, you could cross endorse, and he wasn't even willing to cross endorse her. He's like, why would I do that? She endorsed me. I don't get it. I think that's how he talks. Yeah.
Awesome. It's just like Obama.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, moving on. Second screenshot here. We have Mamdani, acknowledged by all to be the only candidate threatening the resurrection of former Governor Andrew Cuomo's political career. So they are acknowledging here that they are de facto endorsing Cuomo. Just worth noting and thinking about who Cuomo's got in his corner. Is currently the progressive darling of New York, which on its own terms is enough to disqualify him for the position he seeks. He's a member of the DSA with a list of campaign promises that revisits nearly every discredited left-wing fantasy of the last decade. Universal health care, rent freezes, the use of social workers as opposed to policing to control urban violence, etc. His most prominent campaign initiative is a promise to eliminate city bus fares, a fantasy which would, if implemented, blow a hole in the MTA's budget, inevitably lead to service reductions. He has also advocated the eventual implementation of a $30 minimum wage. Okay, so some of this is just them noting that Zoran is the left-wing candidate, and there are right-wing magazines that don't like that. There's not a lot, there's not a lot to be said about that. But it is worth noting that this list, this very short list, right, of his major policy planks, includes at least one just outright lie, and one claim that's at the very least, very misleading. So the outright lie is, let's put it up on the screen one more time, just so to remind people the wording is the thing about the use of social workers as opposed to policing to control urban violence. No. In fact, Mamdani is not calling to defund the police. What he's calling for is supplementing the police with investment in social workers who could do certain kinds of emergency calls, like, mentally ill, homeless person, is causing some disruption, but, there's no particularly violent threat to anybody, in addition to the police. And in fact, the case he's made for this is that this would free up existing police resources to focus on actual violent crime, right? So the claim that he's saying social workers instead of police to control violence is doubly just flat out incorrect, right? He's talked about social workers in addition to police, so the police can handle violent crime and the social workers can handle things where there's no imminent threat of violence, but where otherwise police might be called to. Nick French had a really good article about this in Jacobin called something like Zoran Mamdani is right about public safety, for people who are curious about the details of all this. But again, that's just not true. The one that's at the very least misleading is the thing about rent freezes, which makes it sound like he's talking about just, freezing all rent throughout the city, which, whatever you think about that, he hasn't gone anything like that far. What he's actually talked about is stabilizing rent for already rent-controlled apartments, right? I mean, that's just a pretty straightforward difference there. But in some ways, what really, and this thing about the how free buses would mean a reduction in fare. I mean, the proposal is to eliminate fares and replace that with revenue from general taxation. So I don't know why the assumption here is that one half that would happen, but the other wouldn't. But what really gets me here is that universal health care and free buses are being described as left-wing fantasies. I mean, there are lots of cities all around the world that have free bus systems, and it works well. In fact, there was a pilot program that Zoran championed on city council to experiment with free buses in New York City that worked quite well. Led to actually increased ridership. Like less altercations, on the bus, because so many of those were about people being challenged about paying fare. Like good results all around. And this universal healthcare is a left-wing fantasy. I mean, look, I'm not going to do the accent, but as a great man likes to say, every other major country on earth has managed to do this. It doesn't really seem like a fantasy.
I just want to say I'm living in one of those fantasy worlds where we have free buses. They just extended it throughout the summer. It's a program to reduce it. They increased money on rich people by like 1%, and they were able to give us free bus rides. So today, when I was exhausting myself bringing my bike home because I was out drinking Saturday night and got a ride home, I didn't have to pay fare to ride the bus to get my bike home. So there's that. And now I got it all through the summer till September, end of September.
It's still a fantasy, just one of those fantasies that sometimes happens in lots of different places, but still, our fantasy is that it would happen in New York.
Matt McManus, who's one of our guests tonight, is backstage and points out in the private chat that Detroit, for example, has managed to implement this, which again seems to me that, look, I'm a West Coast loyalist. I'm skeptical, but I keep being told that New York is the greatest city in the world. If they can't get it together to offer free public buses, I'm really increasingly skeptical of this claim that it's the greatest city in the world. But if it's just a fantasy that New York could figure out how to do that. But all right, let's.
It's so great. Why are they always coming out to visit me? All the people with money in New York City live in Western Mass and the Berkshires.
Fair enough. Well, let's move on to so this is number 3. New York City need only look at the fate of Chicago with its ultra progressive and despised mayor Brandon Johnson for a truer vision of the sort of future Mamdani is advertising. Instead, okay, so there's a left-wing mayor in Chicago, and he's had problems, and he's unpopular. That's what they're saying. Therefore, he would be. Thank God there are no conservative or centrist mayors that that would apply to. But I want to move on to this part. Instead, we oppose Mamdani's moral unworthiness. He is worse than a democratic socialist. Okay, I have a hard time imagining anything worse than a democratic socialist, but we're about to find out what that is. He is, as evidenced by an adult life's worth of political actions, a deeply committed pro-Hamas activist and advocate for the abolition of Israel. Okay, the pro-Hamas thing is just a lie. It's obviously a lie. The abolition of Israel part is the more interesting part to me, because in fact, Zoran has pissed off the lunatic fringe of the Palestine solidarity movement by refusing to say that he doesn't think Israel, has a right to exist. You can find videos of people heckling him in really crazy ways over this. What he said is that they should just have equal rights for everybody there, which I'd really like to. I would really like if the National Review explained why that was bad. Why having equal rights is bad. I mean, I will note that there was a time when this magazine had the courage of their convictions when it came to explaining such things. Just as a little Easter egg, I would recommend that people Google a unsigned editorial in the National Review in 1957 called "Why the South Must Prevail." But tell me now why equal rights for members of all ethnic groups is a bad thing. I guess, to be fair, they do kind of take a stab at it in the next paragraph. So they say, Mamdani has stated repeatedly, including during a recent mayoral debate, when pressed directly on the issue by both Cuomo and the moderator, that he does not believe Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. Invoking the by now familiar code language, he instead argues that Israel could only exist, quote, as a state with equal rights, unquote. That is to say, the, quote, right of return, unquote. A week ago in an interview, Mamdani refused to condemn the use of the phrase globalize the Intifada, universally understood as a call to bring Hamas's particular tactics of resistance to the Western world, and doubled down by favorably comparing the term to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Okay, so the first part of this is claiming that saying people should have equal rights is bad because that would mean that these Palestinian families who spent the last 77 years living in refugee camps might be able to go back to the cities they were ethnically cleansed from in 1948. Again, why that's bad, they don't feel the need to explain. That it's just in National Review world, it just goes without saying. But to my mind, the more serious part, right? Sorry, let's get this back up here for a second. Of this is this business about globalizing the Intifada. Now, why that would be universally understood as a call to bring Hamas's particular tactics of, quote, resistance, unquote, to the Western world is unclear to me. That the first Intifada, even if all were, like all you hear when you hear that phrase is, the sort of original Palestinian context was before there even was a Hamas. It started at least before there even was a Hamas, and mostly did not involve Hamas-style tactics. But really the outright lie here is, or maybe this is an outright lie. Really, the severely and misleading at best statement is the double down by favorably comparing the term to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It's a really garbled way to put it, but what they mean by that is that he pointed out that if you say the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, if you use that phrase in Arabic, the word at the end of the phrase is Intifada. And that's just like a fact about the Arabic language, that the word for uprising is Intifada. And I think he was using that to make a point about the misleadingness of restricting the word in that way. And again, saying just it's at best extremely misleading to parse that by saying he was favorably comparing it to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. He was pointing out that the Arabic translation of the phrase Warsaw Ghetto Uprising includes the word intifada. Now, for the record, my own view is that both sides of the discourse about the phrase globalize the intifada annoy the shit out of me. I think it's a very LARPy slogan. And it's kind of edginess for the sake of edginess and feeling radical, and I think it's needlessly counterproductive in the war for hearts and minds. And it's just kind of LARPy. I mean, I don't think anybody who uses that slogan is actually planning to start an uprising in Brooklyn or Silver Lake or wherever they live. But also, I think sort of parsing this sort of vague revolutionary slogan about a global uprising against injustices as a call for violence against diaspora Jews is kind of ridiculous. But I want to move on, right? Let's do, I think, what are we up to here? 5. So it says, these are not fashionable or late adopted positions for Mamdani. While in college in Bowdoin, is that how you say that?
Yeah, I think so. And if we piss them off, I mean, whatever.
Yeah, fair enough. Fuck him. All right. College, I have nothing against this college. Anyway, he co-founded his school's chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine for years, including his brief tenure as an assemblyman. Mamdani has been a vocal supporter of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement designed to academically and intellectually isolate Israelis and Zionist Jews from Western scientific discourse. He has repeatedly and emphatically called Israel's war in Gaza a genocide. All right, so I just want to pause on this. Obviously, that last part just shows that he, is aware of the dictionary definition of the term. And I also want to note here that we've gone from accusing him of wanting to foment violent uprising to being mad that he wants to sort of try to turn Israel into a state of equal rights, as he says, through a non-violent economic boycott, right? I mean, that seems like quite a shift to me. But in any case, it goes on. In 2017, he recorded a rap song sending his love to the Holy Land Five, leaders of the Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development, convicted in 2008 of providing material support to terrorism to Hamas. Now, the insinuation they're trying to do in this line is that these people were guilty as charged, that Zoran knew they were guilty, and that's why he was sending them his love, because they were funneling, they were providing some sort of support to Hamas, and he loves Hamas, and that's why. If you spend like 30 seconds on Google looking into this, right, the Holy Land Five, right, are people who are raising, charitable funds for desperate Palestinians who were accused of this, yeah, but the trial, that convicted them was kind of a joke on due process grounds. You can find civil rights lawyers from all over the world who've condemned it and said it was kind of a show trial because it was all based on hearsay. Human Rights Watch, has called for these people to be released, said they're not guilty. So, I think a much more obvious interpretation would be that he agrees with all these civil rights lawyers that they weren't properly convicted. He doesn't think they were guilty. But they say perhaps most tellingly of all, when news of the October 7th massacre first arrived, Mamdani issued a statement saying nothing about Hamas. Instead, he called for ending the occupation, dismantling apartheid. Now, if you follow, we don't have the graphic, but if you follow their link to the statement, when they say, and remember, this is the thing they said was most telling of all, when they say he said nothing about Hamas, I mean, that's true in the sense that he doesn't use the word Hamas. He also doesn't use the IDF, right? He doesn't name the IDF. He also doesn't name the Likud party, right? But he talks about, the deaths of people in the last 36 hours in Israel and Palestine. So he's clearly included people killed by Hamas. And the whole statement is a call for de-escalation and peace, which you just absolutely would not think from the National Review's summary of it. But wrapping up, because we need to go to the main event. And last paragraph of this, it says, the mayor of New York has a job unlike that of any other politician in the United States. Theoretically, he is just another local politician. In reality, he is a representative for America on the global stage, the leader of the most important metropolis in the free world, the gathering place of the United Nations. The city is also home to more Jews than anywhere outside of Israel, a population increasingly threatened by hatred and violence. For the sake of the city, America's global reputation, and simple decency, voters should leave Zoran Mamdani's name off their ballot altogether. He is not merely the worst choice on offer, he is unacceptable under any circumstances. All right. So, what I got out of that was that for some reason, it would be bad in terms of, you know, the chances of like intracommunal violence happening in New York, or the reputation of America in the world, to have a mayor who supports human rights for Palestinians and is very much on record as opposing violence of any kind. And, you know, speaks at synagogue, seems to be interested in all sorts of, you know, interethnic bridge building. I don't know why that would be true. I mean, this is one of those places I really want them to spell out the mechanism, right? Like what exactly do you think is going to happen if this guy's elected mayor? That's going to lead to the you know, pogroms in New York. But I guess to their minds, this just goes without saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a Jewish New Yorker, just from like a selfish perspective, first of all, I'm not that nervous about, you know, anti-Semitism. To be fair, I do think if you're like visibly Jewish,
sure.
it's probably a bigger concern for you. But I would just say, as a Jewish person who doesn't want to, you know, face anti-Semitism, I would personally want someone who's actually looking to like de-escalate things, right, and not just inflame the conflict with incendiary rhetoric and just bring up Israel at every opportunity, and supporting them committing war crimes, and, you know, saying, I'm going to go there immediately. I've been there 10 times. I'm excited to go there 11 times. If anything, I wouldn't want that kind of talk, because I feel like even within the city, that's just going to inflame negative viewpoints about Israel and lead to more conflation of Israel and just Jews writ large. You know what I mean? If anything, I think someone like him would do, who I do believe is very supportive of the New York Jewish community, would actually help to illuminate the difference between supporting Israel and supporting just like Jewish people in general. Because I mean, the idea that he is personally anti-Semitic is just really, really silly. if you've been following him for any amount of time and following DSA and look at the membership of DSA in New York, it's just you know, look at the Jewish membership of that organization. It's just a very silly claim.
Yeah. I mean, it's I mean, right. Like the two big strikes against him in that article are that he's a terrible anti-Semite and that he's a member of this like ridiculously disproportionately Jewish left-wing organization. You know, so there's an interesting question about how those two fit together. But I do want to just say real quick, New York got in the way. We were planning to do a whole thing about Iran. We might do some of that in the post game. But I do just want to briefly say that I have two articles out about this. One of them is in Unheard. Now, I will say, if I got to pick my own head, so this is about the amazing discovery made by many Israeli officials and Israel supporters in the West that bombing civilians is wrong, which is a discovery they made since Iran's retaliatory strike started. Now, if I got to pick my own headline, I might go with something like blood-soaked genocidal monsters cross previously undreamt of frontiers of hypocrisy. But my editors, Unheard or Brits, they prefer, you know, a more understated approach. Hence, is Israel's criticism of Iran consistent? And then the other one was at MSNBC. It's called Trump's America First supporters feel duped by his hawkishness on Iran. Again, we might get into some of that in the post game, but meanwhile, links to both of those are down in the description below. And with that, we are going to, I will see you guys in the post game for patrons. And meanwhile, we have Matt McManus for his billionth or so appearance on GTAA. And we have Michael O'Neill Burns for his very first appearance on the show. How you doing, guys?
Hey, excited to be here. Good to meet you, Ben.
Yeah, good to meet you too. I think I actually technically did once before, but yeah, that's.
Oh wait. Yeah, sorry. My brain is bad. I have a bad brain. I'm not like you guys. You guys have good brains. I have a bad brain.
Yeah, well, not in any meaningful context. I think like at a bar for a minute, but yeah.
Yeah. My memory just clicked now, so yes.
Fair enough.
I appreciate the compliment, but as my wife never ceases to remind me, I forgot what her sister's name was for about the first month of our relationship. She was just, sister, family, all that kind of stuff. And finally it came to a head when she's like, well, what is my sister's name? What is my sister's name? And I was like, God fucking damn it. There's no more dodging this any longer. So I sometimes wish I had the attitudes people project onto me. That would have been a handy time to have a good brain.
Well, in fairness, I'll be really specific. You're people that I think of as having good brains in your capacity to read complex text and then efficiently write down your ideas and thoughts about those texts. You might be terrible at everything else.
Yeah,
that's true. Fair enough. I adopt like the kind of Homer Simpson mantra, right? Look, I can remember important things about family and dates and, healthcare stuff, but then I'll just push out some theories. So the reality is the theory has to stay. All that other less important stuff has to go. That's the way it works with my mind, unfortunately.
Well, speaking of theory, Matt, this whole episode was kind of your baby to begin with. That you thought this would be interesting to do this. Do you want to kind of get us kicked off?
Yeah, of course. So part of the reason I suggested this is I've been a fan of Michael's, going all the way back to Wisecrack. By the way, I watched your video today about how they treat you, and I'm really sorry about that. I appreciate the grind is real, but getting booted off of your show without severance pay is a fucking low blow, even by the standards of neoliberalism. So solidarity there.
Thanks for watching.
But, Michael's done a lot of good things on capitalist realism, depression under capitalism, and the kind of role that, ideology plays in shifting the blame from structural factors towards personal psychology, et cetera. And more recently, he's done some really good stuff on postmodernism and Fred Jameson, who I had an intellectual love affair with for a couple years. So I thought that given our shared interests in Marxism, philosophy, critical theory, et cetera, we could chat about something that I don't think you and I have ever really talked about all that much on the show, Ben, which is ideology, right? I don't mean ideology in the kind of neutral sense of, there's socialist ideology, liberal ideology, conservative ideology, et cetera, but in the more strictly kind of Marxist sense, which we can debate, right? Meaning a kind of false apprehension of the world that's thrown up by social circumstances, which raises the question, can we actually get a good understanding or an accurate understanding of the social world? So there's some neat epistemic and social ontological questions that we can munch on for this discussion.
Yeah, so ideology in the sense that I'm not gonna try to do a Slovenian accent, but ideology, right? That kind of ideology.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, Ben's friends with Zizek, and as he never ceases to remind me, the one time I appeared on a show where Zizek was here, Zizek basically claimed prima nocta rights over my wife. So that was an interesting.
So he before we started recording, Matt said, "Oh, it's so great to be doing the show with you. Actually, my wife and I met, like one of your seminars." And Zizek said, "Oh, so really, I should, that was where the prima nocta joke came in." But yeah, that is the thing he said. That is the kind of thing he says sometimes. All right, so let's maybe before we go to Slovenia or Jameson, Maybe let's start with Marx, right? So as Jordan Peterson would say, right? Said in his debate with Zizek, it's where all the trouble started, right? So this is one way of understanding some of what Marx is saying is that like whatever ideas people have about politics, philosophy, religion, just sort of reflect economic conditions or maybe class interests or something like that, and that's so it's really it's really always a reflection of that, and any kind of attempt to sort of deal with those things on their merits sort of misses the point, because it's never really a reflection of reality. It's always just a reflection of that stuff, which I think that's some of what you were getting at before, Matt. If you really thought that, right? I mean, one really obvious problem would be, hold on, like if everything that people think is just a reflection of that stuff, then how is what you're saying, the special exception, right? That's that you're just like describing reality. But of course, so that's a problem that comes up if you take it that way. Whether that's what Marx actually thinks or whether he's saying something a little bit more nuanced than that is maybe the first question to start with. But yeah, yeah.
I'm curious what you think about this, Ben. I mean, do you think that your understanding there shifts at all if we incorporate the dialectic into that? Meaning that, like, if one says, to be very, very crass here, hey, non-Marxist, non-ideologically clued in friend, the thing that you think is real, whether it comes via culture or religion or whatever, is an ideological construct. There's a real thing happening. They say to me, well, who are you, Neo, unplugged from the Matrix? Why do you get to say that you know what the thing is? Is the difference that often ideology, or the way it's presented to us, is kind of structurally non-dialectical, and that approaching things dialectically, I'm not saying that gives you like an out to say like my way of thinking isn't ideological because it's dialectical, but that it's one of the mechanisms by which we deconstruct or like start with the cracks in ideological structures.
Yeah, I think that there are, let's call it two kinds of vulgar Marxism or vulgar Marxist approach to ideology that you sometimes see. One is the one that you just described, right? That all ideology is a kind of false consciousness, right? What do you say? The matrix that's kind of pulled down in front of your eyes. And so all you need is the right philosopher or the right theoretical guide to come along, give you the red pill, in this case, the right red pill, not Curtis Yarvin's red pill. And abracadabra, you see the world the way that it really is, and you never go back to falling victim to those illusions again. And I think that anybody who reads Marx's work carefully will know that that's not what he's talking about when he's talking about ideology, right? A very good example of this that Ben and I have talked about before, and I've seen you reference inadvertently in your show, is his approach to religion, right? Everybody knows that sentence. Religion is the opiate of the masses, right? Which kind of implies that it is the matrix, right? It's kind of the world that's pulled in front of your eyes to blind you to the truth because it's comforting. People forget the next part of that sentence, which is where Marx called it the heart of a heartless world, and described it as a kind of necessary set of illusions, as long as there's alienation in reality. So I think we can kind of push aside the simple false consciousness understanding of Marx's approach to ideology. The other one, which is a little bit more complicated and also a little bit more fun, is I think what you were getting to earlier, Ben. The idea that ideology or your ideological preconceptions are largely the consequence of your class situatedness, right? This is kind of a reading that people riff on in the German ideology, right? Where it says that really your social conditions are what determines your consciousness, not the other way around. So if you're a working class person, you'll see the world one way. If you're middle class, you'll see it another. If you're rich, you'll see the world, in another way entirely as well, right? And I definitely think, to your point about New York, Ben, that there is some truth to this, right? I mean, you hear rich people all the time who will talk about how one day we're going to become transhumans living in computers. And, all this is going to be achievable within the next 4 or 5 years, apparently, if we just give them enough money. but free buses in the largest, wealthiest city in the world. That is just an unbelievable utopian dream. It cannot happen because don't you realize that civilization is going to collapse, Hamas is going to win, and the barbarians will be at the gates in days if we just allow public transportation, right? So I think that there's definitely something to at least some of this kind of class-based reading of ideology, right? That where you are situated economically determines how you think about things. But to your point, Michael, right, there are plenty of exceptions to that, right? We can think of rich people who become Marxists, and boy, oh boy, do I know a lot of working class guys who are vigorously pro-Trump and think that Elon Musk is the greatest genius destined to take us to Mars that has ever existed, right? So I think we need to nuance a Marxist approach to ideology beyond that as well.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Ben's talking, but I can't hear him.
He's been silenced by the big other.
Oh, no. Did we just take over the show, I think we can just say anything now. And no, but I think I'll say this while everyone comes back.
No. You said what you're going to say anyway.
Well, no, just the one version of that you described, Matt. It's almost like a sort of like, I don't want to say boring, but I guess I'll say boring, like naturalized ideology, or sort of like a theological way of looking at it, where you are of this class, you are from this place, and thus you are somehow metaphysically endowed with XYZ ideology, rather than that ideology being something that's developed via your interactions with the world, society, culture, media, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's the same way that people talk about being raised Catholic, and that's just the belief system you have, right? If you're raised rich in the United States, you see the world the way that a rich man would, right? And again, I think there's a lot of truth to that, just like there's a lot of truth to if you're raised Catholic, you might stay Catholic. But we all know people who apostatize from the creed of their birth, and there are plenty of people whose class situatedness doesn't really explain how they think about the world, at least certainly in my experience. Oh, Ben, you're silent again. Maybe Michael really is taking over your show.
I didn't mean to. The Catholicism thing is an interesting example, though, because sometimes I almost think like anyone I know who's a true Catholic ends up becoming some sort of Marxist late in life, because the system will like get you there if you think through its consequences. Literally, that's really a convenient thing for me to think to justify a lineage of Catholicism.
Well, I was raised Roman Catholic, so there you go.
Yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say a couple of things about that. One, I did want to dig in a little bit to the dialectical part, because, that's one of those words that, people throw around a lot. And sometimes, right, that's sort of used to denote things that are sort of meaningful and interesting. A lot of times, I mean, Michael Heinrich has this line in his book about capital about how, dialectical is just sort of used to being like, well, it's all terribly complicated and, everything's connected. It's like, doesn't really tell you that much, right? So I just want to like try to think about what the specifics of the view are supposed to be. And certainly in the Marx case, right? I mean, like that line about the, social being and social consciousness, at least in the form I'm familiar with, comes from the 1859 preface, which is this sort of classic statement of historical materialism. And I think it's really important to look at the context of what he's saying when he says that, right? For some clue as to what he's getting at, because he's describing it's these few paragraphs, the preface, he's sort of describing this grand sweep across history of modes of production, rising and falling, feudalism, capitalism, socialism. And, he's talking about that. He's talking about these relations of production changing over the course of history, when he says it's not the, consciousness of men that determines their being, but their social being that determines their social consciousness. And it seems to me, I mean, maybe this is too boringly minimalistic, but I mean, like, it seems to me that a lot of what he's, saying there is really just as simple as like, look, it's not the bullshit that people come up with to rationalize whatever social system there is that explains why that social system exists, right? It's the the causality is the other way around, right? That they have it's like, John Locke didn't invent capitalism, right? He just came up with a rationalization for this sort of emerging system. And even in the next lines where he talks about, he says something about the class struggle and the various forms, artistic, philosophical, religious, whatever, in which people become aware of that. I mean, I think that it doesn't really seem to me as saying that like every single thing that people think about art, religion, philosophy, etc., is just a reflection of that, which would be really implausible if you did. I mean, that would be kind of a crazy thing to say, right? That there's like all of human thought, all of human culture is really just that monocausal, right? There's nothing else going on there except for economics and class struggle. Whereas if you think what he's saying is that, well, the primary thing that's driving the class struggle itself is these opposed interests, and people tend to come up with ways of expressing those interests and all these things, that feels a little bit more plausible to me. So, maybe he's saying something that goes beyond that. Maybe this is just me sort of tending to read Marx as saying something that seems more reasonable to me. But I do think, given the context of what he's saying, that doesn't seem.
Is there a way to read the first example you gave, where and you gave an example of like a quote, I guess like a bad reading, which would be, every single thing boils down to some ideological framework and able to do that. Is there another version of that, which is maybe a little more reasonable, that's something like we have certain ideological starting points or bearings, like almost some sort of primordial, whether we think about it or not, philosophical or like transcendental framework? That's our starting point for making sense of the world. The way in which the person who grows up religious, it's not necessarily to say that their religion determines or shapes every single experience they have, but it is their ideological starting point from which they begin. So there's a way in which, sorry, Matt, you look like you're ready to.
No, please go finish up. I was going to jump on that.
No, jump on it.
Oh, I was going to say, I completely agree with that reading. In fact, I pushed it for a long time, so I'm happy that you're pushing it as well, right? This is kind of inspired by Alan Wood, the kind of great analytical Marxist and Kantian. It doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but I actually think he makes it work. Because one of the things that he points out is it's not a coincidence that Marx talks about his major works as critiques of political economy, kind of echoing this Kantian idea of critique, but turning it, if you want, right side up, to use the Hegelian metaphor. What does he mean, right? He says, well, look, Kant basically says that human cognition is characterized by generative limitations that are formed by the transcendental architecture of the mind, right? You and I will always see the world in terms of space and time. Those space and time really exist outside of transcendental intuitions. Who the fuck knows, right? Certainly not you and me, because that means knowing things in and of itself, and that sends you to hell if you even try to ask questions about the thing in and of itself, right? But these limitations are generative, according to Kant, right? If we couldn't see the world according to the intuitions of space and time, we probably wouldn't be able to apprehend anything at all, right? And from Wood's point of view, what Marx does is socialize this, right? By saying, look, every social form throws up certain ways of apprehending the world that are recursive, right? They simultaneously engender the social world that we experience and reinforce that same social world. And within those kinds of limitations, there are certain kinds of social laws that are operative that have kind of objectivity or assume a kind of objectivity, right? If you live in a capitalist society, you're going to probably see the world in terms of things like supply and demand. And so you're going to have social laws or economic laws that operate according to the laws of supply and demand that hold for that historical epoch. The problem, and this is where Marx has a kind of revolutionary twist to his work, is by saying once we recognize that the social way of apprehending the world that's kind of thrown up by various conditions is historically contingent, we also realize that we can replace our way of apprehending the world with another way of apprehending the world by changing the mode of production, right? So people who saw the world one way under the feudal system will eventually start to see it quite a different way, at least their social world, under capitalism. And he thinks that under socialism, we might see it in a different way as well. Now, to Ben's point, I think that there are exaggerated versions of this thesis that you see in like Trotsky sometimes, right? Which suggests that under socialism, we're finally going to have no more illusions and we're going to see the world straight, right? And, all scientific problems are going to be solved and every person will be elevated to the heights of a Goethe, Marx, and Aristotle, etc. I think that that's wildly implausible, right? But I do definitely accept the idea that if we kind of grasp this historical process, we can come to a more rational understanding of how it is that we apprehend our social world than before. And this does constitute an advance on our understanding of knowledge from a social scientific perspective.
Yeah, I mean, look, I my view on the goal of socialism is the Freud's thing about the goal of psychoanalysis to reduce hysterical misery to ordinary unhappiness. So like I'm happy with that. We don't all need to be Aristotle and Goethe, but I do just want to jump on Michael.
Didn't you tell me the other week that your real aspiration is to be Charlie Kirk, right? Just aspire to that level of erudition and knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, if possible. Well, sure, but we can't all be Charlie, right?
Yeah. Didn't you say like you're a Kirkian? You're always going to be a Kirkian. That's just kind of your outlook from now on.
Wait, now I need to ask this, Ben. I know you've talked to lots of like really, and this is I'm saying this. You're not saying this, but just like some of the worst dudes. Have you ever talked to Kirk?
I did. I
did.
You
talked to all these guys. It's amazing.
I did a debate with Charlie Kirk in 2021. In Phoenix, which I was really, I mean, I love that one because his brain works in a really obvious way, and so I felt really good about it because like every time he'd like broach some subject, like you could always kind of see where he was going for like a while. Like he was like, oh, so you like Norway, right? I was like, all right, which is it going to be? Is it going to be they don't let in very many immigrants, or is it going to be the oil, right? It's like, well, did you know the oil, right? It's like it makes it very, very easy to respond to. But
sorry to sidetrack with that. I had to ask though.
Yeah. Well, so I did want to go to your point though, right? Because I like your way of thinking about this, about starting points, right? Because ideology in the bad sense, right? Like not just in the neutral sense of like as a sort of different way of saying worldview or perspective or something, but like in the sense of this like specious rationalization for the way things are, or whatever, that kind of ideology. That's if you were to say sure. Like that's clearly a thing that exists in the world, but it's if you sort of reduce everything to that, right? So like you're sort of all your you like do the things that some people think that they need to do to be a good materialist, which is like I just think like everything everybody thinks about everything, right? Is like ideological and ultimately just caused by economic conditions or whatever, right? That then, among other things, it becomes a very great mystery how anybody, what you said before, right, becomes Neo in the Matrix, and is saying the things that the people who are pointing all this stuff out themselves are saying. But if you just think, okay, look, if you live in a society, you are likely to have imbibed certain kinds of, certain kinds of bullshit about that society, right? I mean, that's which is just like reasonable. You don't have to, and I should say, by the way, I mean, you don't have to think that that's like the main cause of people not rebelling against the society or anything like that. Just like, look, if you're gonna live under unjust social conditions, you'll sleep a little easier at night if you think that it's not really that unjust. And so if you have some convenient ideological rationalizations wafting around, that can definitely help the medicine go down. Like that's all true. And in any case, I mean, the people, whoever's in charge of any given society, or for predictable and obvious reasons, going to tend to have like various kinds of cultural institutions in that society saying things that are congenial to them, whatever, right? So it's like, I think it's reasonable to say, look, you're going to have you might have starting points that are going to reflect that the same way that, sure, you might be raised Catholic and then, watch a bunch of Richard Dawkins videos as a teenager and, whatever, right? Like go off in a different direction, but like at least the starting point for that explanation is going to be thinking whatever you were raised thinking, right? That there might be something like this that's true for societies and economic systems. I like it also just because it, preserves a role for like reasoning that you're not, that's like, like you can, even if you have some like starting points that reflect this stuff, you can still get over it.
And Marx always said, ideas can become a practical force when they're gripped by the proletariat or gripped by agents in history, right? So I don't think he was skeptical or hyper skeptical that there wasn't a role for reason to play, right?
Okay, well, I do want to move on from Marx here because I know Matt, you have a pretty hard out at 45 minutes after the hour, and I want to make sure that we get to some of the stuff that
they have free fireworks in Detroit that my wife really wants to go see, and I don't blame her because they're free. So
yeah, you're allowed. So I do want to make sure that we cover some of the other thinkers that you mentioned who might be relevant here. I want to maybe start with one that you guys probably both have more to say about than I do, just given your interests. Jake, I think we have a graphic here. So this is Frederick Jameson.
Yay.
So what's the insight that you're getting here about how to think about ideology?
Well, there are a lot of things to be said about Jameson, right? I mean, he had a very long career saying brilliant and sometimes very hard to understand things going back to the 1970s, right? But for me, he'll always be associated with two books. One is really well-known, Postmodernism, or The Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, which is apparently the bestseller in the press's history, right? They're just
I was actually just watching a video that Michael did that was all about this, like the other day, I think. What's really wrong with postmodernism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people should check that out because, you do a lot of great stuff, Mike, but I really like that video because it played to my interest. What can I say? But I'll start with the other book is Archaeology is the Future, is a big book on sci-fi and utopianism, which is a weird book, but I think really quite beautiful in places. But anyway, my core understanding of that book, and maybe you disagree, Mike, is that what he talks about is how culture becomes an expression. It's a logic of the mode of production under which we happen to inhabit or we're dominated under. And what he says about postmodernity is that a lot of the critics of postmodernity are wrong, right? Postmodernism didn't emerge because Derrida decided he got really tired with there being just two genders and thought it'd be a lot more fun if there were 50. And he wrote a lot about how there should be 50 genders while also talking about how we should execute and guillotine all the capitalists. And bada bing, bada boom, postmodernism appeared, right?
Is that not what happened?
Yeah, if you read Grammatology in places, he does suggest this, but
that book would be a lot more accessible and interesting if it was just a bullet point list of Derrida like lining up his people to be guillotined.
Yeah, totally, right. I mean,
well, that'll be the section 2. Section 1 would just be listing all the genders.
Yeah, and going through them all in minute detail, right? But what Jameson says actually is that's a pretty silly idea, right? The idea that French intellectuals have somehow completely shaped American culture right down to South Park and what it's airing, it's kind of ridiculous, right? What he actually says is that postmodernity is the cultural logic of late capitalism because it reflects in cultural form a lot of the kind of imperatives and sensibilities that emerge under the capitalist mode of production. And the book is very complicated and there are a lot of aspects of it, but I think the really core one is this idea that under capitalist hegemony, a lot of the kind of relations that appear in capitalism are so naturalized that we just can't imagine living in the world without them any longer, right? This is this whole idea of it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So a lot of the work is talking about how postmodernism emerges as a response to this deep feeling that people have under capitalism, that there's no more history, right? There are no more big debates to be had about what mode of production we're going to have and what social form is going to be built upon that mode of production. Capitalism is just here to stay, right? And Jameson says, if you really internalize that idea that there's no more historical experimentation that's worth having, it can lead you to feel pretty fucking shitty, really. It's the simple way to put it, right? The technical term I think he uses, right? Why? Because you have really no important role to play in trying to bring about a better world. At most, what you can do is what you see in a lot of postmodern art, right? Recycle the tropes of the past in this kind of museum-like way to kind of momentarily echo the feelings that people once had through aesthetics by pointing to symbols that used to have a lot of resonance when people still existed in history, but no longer have any kind of resonance because we don't live in history anymore. An example that I use to kind of point to this that might seem a little bit strange, but Jameson did write about this, is the Avengers. Think about the Avengers movies. Now I'm a Marvel fan, so I'm not criticizing liking them, right? I think they're pretty good be entertainment, or at least were until recently. But in the Avengers, you have a Norse
I
gods.
just don't understand why all of them have to be the length of The Godfather. I mean, like a comic book movie should be like 90 minutes.
I would dispute that, but that's a discussion for another day. I quite like Avengers Endgame, but think
I'm
about
happy
it like
to come
this,
back for that show when you guys do it if you need someone.
Yeah, absolutely, right. You have Black Widow, who's a Cold War spy, Captain America, who's the kind of World War II icon. You have a Norse god, right? Kind of echoing all these kind of vital Aryan qualities. You get the idea. All this is kind of assembled in a pastiche that doesn't really make an awful lot of sense because these things shouldn't belong together. But Jameson would say this is very much a kind of postmodern artifact. Why? Because we can't really think of any new ideas. We can't really invent any new heroic forms that would embody a potential post-capitalist future. So we're stuck with kind of recycling what's existed before and trying to find new ways to combine it in order to basically make people acquiescent to the contemporary status quo. So it's a very provocative and very powerful thesis that has been picked up by a lot of people, and there are a lot of variations on it. But it's kind of a cultural expression of the capitalist social form that we happen to inhabit.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Jameson is it's such a weird balance of someone who, I mean, I find Jameson, especially parts of Jameson, incredibly difficult to read.
Yeah.
Always like worth it, but very difficult. However, he's someone whose ideas, when translated or transmitted in a clear way with examples, really connect to people. So I think we think about because I think an issue with ideology and ideological critique is sort of, it's one thing if you're talking to your buds who read all the Zizek sources and stuff like that and can wax Marx and Lacan and Hegel and Freud all day. But I think, even given the Avengers example, I feel like Jameson offers a lot of ins, both in media and digital culture, for discussing ideology and kind of showing how I think capital shapes elements of culture that folks might not realize or might not think are just reflections of that. And I think the history thing is really important there. Like I've been on an Adam Curtis binge recently. If my therapist is watching, I'm okay. But, and I don't know if Adam Curtis is a reader of Jameson. It'd be shocking to imagine that he hadn't at some point. But, a theme you get over and over again in Adam Curtis's work is just like major political figures in the West act as if there is something new, but there is nothing new. They have no coherent ideology they believe in anymore. All they do is create little forms of like political pastiche to serve the market while being unable to imagine anything else. I think that end of history, not in a Fukuyama sense, but I think Jameson describes that really well and really convincingly.
Yeah, and he had some really brutal takedowns of reactionaries also, which is another reason I find his work a lot of fun. He's nowhere as more lucid and accessible than when criticizing bad conservative takes. Because I'll point out that the reasons given for cultural decline by conservatives are almost always exclusively cultural, right? They never get at the materiality of cultural production the way that a good Marxist should. But he says that's nonsensical, right? And I'll give you an example. Matt Walsh, right? Matt Walsh the other day was bitching and moaning, as is his wont, online about how nobody's doing anything new anymore. Everyone's just producing sequel after sequel after sequel because Hollywood has no new ideas, which is why you should watch the Daily Wire programming, right? To which I respond, I've seen Lady Ballers, Matt, and
tough.
I would rather take the shittiest Adam Sandler movie on a day when I wasn't even drunk to Lady Ballers. Maybe if I was in a really ironic mood, but that'd be a very different thing. Right?
This is also just a basic difference between you and me. There's a lot of I'll read conservative stuff to argue against it. I'll do like a podcast debate with conservative. I'm not gonna fucking watch Lady Ballers.
Well, it's
real sicko shit. That's like true sicko shit when you do that. I skimmed through. I mean, then again, I've watched every God's Not Dead film and thought about them deeply, so I can't judge. I too am a sicko, but I think Ben, you're much healthier in that sense.
Yeah,
I watched the first God's Not Dead. I was good there.
I got enough.
You're missing the glory of the whole arc of the quartet, though. The big ups and downs, the decline in quality. Anyway, I will save that for another time. But what Jameson would say about this kind of Walsh observation is Walsh isn't wrong to say that Hollywood has a bad habit of producing shitty sequel after shitty sequel, franchise after franchise, just constantly recycling this. But it's not because of some ambiguous idealistic in the technical sense, cultural decline that's taking place. The reason is that material production of films these days is extremely expensive because of the limitations of our social form, which means that there's an enormous amount of financial incentives in Hollywood to just produce the same thing again and again and again, because it's a sure bet than signing off on something that might be original, new, and fresh, let alone something that might be countercultural and genuinely dangerous to the status quo. So, we get things that are docile, quiescent, might appropriate some countercultural forms at their most extreme, but always in a relatively safe way. And Jameson would say this is a much better explanation for why it is that we just get this endless repetition and endless recycling in Hollywood and other cultural mediums than, the conservative thesis, which is just, we've let too many Jews and minorities into our society and they're just mucking everything up, right? And if we just got rid of them, then we go back to a nice pure culture that would be able to reproduce the glories of ancient Athens and ancient Rome.
Yeah, while we're doing sequels. Okay, I want to, I do want to move along. So the other two people that we had kind of slated down as that we might touch on were Zizek, who's already come up a few times, and Wendy Brown. I think I want to save Zizek for last. So let's do Wendy Brown. This is somebody, again, I don't know a tremendous amount about. I have been I've seen things, from and about her, every now and then that I've found kind of intriguing, right? As somebody who comes from a different tradition, but is I think some of the things that I've said in the last few years about some of my problems with the contemporary left and what I think is going on in terms of the pathologies of powerlessness there, leading people to act in further really counterproductive ways. I remember Matt Karp, credit where credit's due, sent me some screenshots from Wendy Brown book from the 90s where she said basically all the same stuff that I thought I was coming up with. So this is clearly somebody who has interesting things to say about a few subjects, but on what we've been talking about, on ideology, right? I mean, Matt, you want to kick us off on Wendy Brown?
Sure. Well, the reason why I have a lot of admiration for her is I think that she's probably the greatest political theorist, certainly critical political theorist writing right now. And if you don't believe me, you should go back and read her 2010s book on walled states and waning sovereignty, where she says very soon the American right is going to become a lot more toxic and it's going to up the ante a lot. And you're going to have a populist politician come along who's going to invoke these kind of macho values and call for building a big wall on the southern border because he wants to crack down on immigration. And this is going to be a necessary ideological transition that neoliberalism is going to make in order to, on the one hand, maintain capital in its most vicious neoliberal form, while at the same time insulating Americans from what they think of as this kind of corrosive internationalism that they associate with neoliberalism. And I do have to say, first in the 2010s, saying that a populist right winger is going to come calling for building a wall on the southern border is about as close to Nostradamus as you can actually get, right? So if political theory ever gets boring for her, she should probably just go into fortune telling, right? There's a lot of money to be made in that, so I've heard, right? But what I think she really contributes to our understanding of ideology is something that's been quite popular, but never, I think, fully successfully carried off in left theory. Which is kind of Marx-Nietzsche fusion, right? So we've talked about Nietzsche on the show before, Ben. We don't really need to get into it again. But what she talks about is how a lot of right-wing ideology in particular is fueled by resentment, right? And this is a theme that goes all the way back to her early book, Wounded Attachments, where she offers a kind of gentle critique of identity politics and talks about how a lot of people who have experienced enormous amounts of oppression and victimization find it very hard to give up their identity or their sense of themselves as a victim, right? And so consequently, they're never really able to develop a new sense of identity that kind of breaks from this history of victimization that so defined them, right? I think it's a very sharp and very interesting kind of critique of left-wing identity politics. But in her more recent book, In the Ruins of Neoliberalism, again, drawing on Marx, she says, look, to understand the way that neoliberal ideology operates today, you need to understand right-wing ressentiment. which is something she says Nietzsche himself didn't really pay a lot of attention to. I think correctly, because she says he was almost always focused on the ressentiment, the peasants, the serfs, the slaves, etc., and how they wanted to upend the higher orders. But she says, think about it like this. So much of MAGA rhetoric and ideology is centered around this theme of dispossession, right? This idea that something is being taken from me that I once had or that I'm entitled to, and I want it back, and I'm willing to do whatever it is I can, whatever it is I need to in order to get it back. And she says, think about what it is that they imagine being taken from them. Their country, their status, their culture, their racial integrity, et cetera, et cetera. What all this signifies for her is that the right is driven by this feeling that it is losing something continuously when progressive and democratic forces are agitating against it. What it's losing is its sense of superiority in the world, right? Or its real material superiority in some circumstances. When rich people say what they want to do is expropriate our wealth and distribute it downwards, or when whites say they want us to be the equal of blacks and we don't want to, they really are, or at least they feel that they're losing something, right? Which is this feeling of superiority or this material affluence, right? And it's only when you understand this feeling of ressentiment that emerges from these feelings of being displaced or having something taken away from you that you can really understand the permutation of right-wing ideology. And one of her more brilliant observations is how she connects this to neoliberalism, because she says, think about Trumpism, right? Trumpism is really this mutant fusion of neoliberal ideology with these right-wing feelings of ressentiment, because Trump fundamentally divides the world into winners and losers, often gives this a kind of meritocratic pass by suggesting that if you've got to the top, you absolutely deserve everything that you've achieved. And if you're at the bottom, then you're a loser and you deserve nothing, except he's very much kind of racialized this and culturalized it, right? By suggesting that if you're a true American, white, middle American, et cetera, all the leftists and all the liberals and all the progressives are trying to take something that you're entitled to because they don't deserve it, but they want it. And so what we need to do is do everything that we can in order to prevent something like that from happening. So I think what she's accomplished, which is really quite difficult to accomplish, but she's done it pretty seamlessly, is integrate these kinds of Nietzschean themes into Marx's ideology theory in a way that makes them really feel vital and interconnected. And this is, to me, kind of a holy grail that people have been chasing after for quite a long time when they look for Marx-Nietzsche fusions. But I don't think anyone else has really pulled it off as successfully as she has.
What would be? I think you said it when you were speaking. If someone, I haven't really read Wendy Brown. What would be the place to go or place to start from? I know you mentioned the wounded identities or something.
Wounded Attachments. Yeah, that's her first book. I would actually suggest, if you're interested in kind of her recent oeuvre, The Walled States Reigning Sovereignties one is a really good place to start. It's only about 80 pages, right? It's really.
I love 80 pages.
Yeah. It's a brisk read. You can read it in an afternoon with a scotch or something, which is not how I did it. I read it soberly and carefully in my office while marking 15 papers. Then you kind of follow that up with In the Ruins of Neoliberalism, I'd say. Those two books will kind of give you a good sense of where she's at right now.
So I'm looking at the list of her books. Somebody in the chat thought that you might be talking about this one, The States of Injury, Power and Freedom in Late Modernity, because I don't see...
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. The Wounded Attachments is an essay in that book.
Okay.
I apologize. Sorry.
That makes sense. Yep.
I relate to everyone in the chat who got excited when they heard that a good book was 80 pages.
I think a lot of books are good books for 80 pages. I mean, fucking Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, that blew my mind, and that's another book that you could kind of kill.
I love
a cafe in a...
No, that's I'm a big fan of that book in particular, and I love good 80-page books in general because I read very slowly. But yeah, I want to and whatever, also concision is virtue, but just at least based on your summary of the Wendy Brown argument, I guess the part that I'm curious about is it sounds like there's this analysis of, Trumpism or certain kinds of right-wing grievance policy, politics in general, that's all about this kind of resentment that's caused by the sort of victories of oppressed or marginalized groups in a sort of when you're when you're used to privilege equality feels like oppression sort of way. And I wonder, and I think this might actually get us back on track for some of the sort of main lines about thinking about ideology and its sort of relationship to material conditions. I wonder about that story because certainly it seems to me, right, that when you think about, like right-wing pseudo-populism a la Trump, it's certainly true that there's a tremendous amount of scapegoating of vulnerable people by it. But it does seem to me that the sort of, core thing that, like it's appealing to that like people think they've lost is stuff they actually have lost. The diagnosis is terrible, right? But the loss is not wrong, right? I mean, it's not, certainly if you think about the decades leading up to the rise of Trump, right? I mean, the deindustrialization, neoliberalism, like it's, increasing, precarity and economic anxiety, that, this is, these are not like people being, mistaken about the world. Like that's not like people are like, oh, actually everything's fine. You're just like under the grips of this weird illusion that that things suck for you now because you resent vulnerable groups. It's like no, like these are actually ways that the world really objectively does suck. It's just that the story being told about it was tremendously misleading.
Oh, absolutely right. I mean, she's written a trilogy of books now. More if you kind of recent stuff on Weber and Nihilistic Times on really just how bad neoliberalism is, right? You're not going to find a more sharp critic of neoliberalism who draws very heavily on Marx and Marxism than Brown. And not coincidentally, she's the one who wrote the intro to the latest translation of Capital, right? So that should also be a kind of signal as to where her ideological loyalties lie. But I think what she adds to Marxist analysis is a better sense of the kind of psychological dimensions of this, right? So Marx, historically, as we know, tends to talk in very structural terms, right, about the social contributors to feelings of alienation and the illusions that emerge for it. What Wendy Brown does, following in the line of people like Nietzsche, is really dive into the individual psychology of what kind of feelings emerge through these feelings of powerlessness and alienation. And to your point, Ben, one of the things that she points out is, look, if you feel extremely powerless under the conditions of neoliberalism, as so many of us do, like there is no future that you have any say in, like elites run everything, then one solution to that might be to actually try to commit yourself to projects of empowerment, especially communal empowerment, right? Saying, let's rebuild unions, let's democratize the country, let's revisit the Constitution and ask what kind of anti-democratic features it has. But all that's pretty challenging and pretty dangerous, right? Another option, if you need to restore these feelings of power, is to say, well, I might not be able to have a say in how my country is governed the way that I want to, but I can definitely vote for politicians who will give me a say in booting out all the people that I think are unworthy and restore my sense that I'm a big shot because I'm able to hurt or cause damage to them in some way, shape, or form. And it's this psychological dimension to Marx's ideology theory, drawing very heavily on Nietzsche, that I think is where her real innovation lies. And just to kind of segue a little bit, I also think that's where people like Slavoj Žižek's innovation lies, right? There's this long history of trying to combine Marx's social insights about the material roots of alienation, et cetera, with things like psychoanalysis. And of course, Slavoj is just an exemplar of that.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because this is part of the reason I wanted to end with Slavoj, because he's.
Didn't he say that he wanted to fuck your mother at some point? Also,
what is with this guy and women in your guys' lives? He's just.
I think I would have remembered that. I don't remember that. I do remember. So actually the only mother joke I can remember off the top of my head from Zizek is he told me that he was recounting a fight that he'd had with his teenage son, and it said, it's fine. It wasn't a big deal. He was just being annoying, right? And they're like going back and forth, and it gets heated. And Zizek yells some, like, I guess, traditional, like, Slovenian insult at him, which translates into it's just like I guess a standard phrase that people in Slovenia shout at each other, and that translates to "man, animal, fuck your mother," and
As you did.
Ooh, boy.
and his son snaps back without having to pause. That already happened. That's how I got here, and which he. Which, as he was recounting it, he was just so proud, right? It's like, that's my boy, right? He could, hold his own so well here, right? But yeah. So in terms of ideology, though, right? I mean, I think that he's probably the most interesting contemporary example of something that has kicked around since at least the first generation of the Frankfurt School, maybe earlier in some forms, which is this idea that a lot of people have had, that if you really want to understand the sort of power or endurance of pro-capitalist ideology, you need to look at psychoanalysis to totally do that, and that this is, like, in some sense, this maybe is where the action is in terms of understanding, some of what's wrong with the world, or at least how what's wrong with the world persists, is thinking about ideology and, whatever insights about ideology we can get from psychoanalysis and all that stuff. And, I love the guy. I've always found him, both very entertaining and, and very insightful about many things. He's been a guest on this show several times, shared a few meals with him, consider the guy something of a friend. But, like, I do actually think that whole tradition in some ways is importantly wrong. And I want to get into that, like why I think that in some ways that I think the emphasis is kind of misguided there. Or at least, be
careful, Ben. I mean, you're about to get at least 10 Patreon unfollows, right? You're trying to cancel Endorno. No accepting that.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, but we could put that on hold, right? Like, what my reservations are about this whole project, or at the very least, maybe to see if we can lure those patrons back. At the very least, my reservations about kind of the emphasis on that project. I'm sort of thinking that this is really where the action is. So yeah, we can put all that on hold for a minute. But before we get to my worries about this, one of you guys want to just kind of start us off with like what some of the basic contributions are here from Zizek?
Well, I feel like one thing that's really important about Zizek is, for better or worse, I would probably argue for better, he's articulated the question of ideology in a way that's connected to so many people, and people that didn't go to grad school and don't have, like, a background in reading theory. And I think there's something that is really important about that. And I think for someone who is so, I don't know, like, esoteric and broad in his understanding of all these ideas, to be able to produce works that, I don't want to say like amateurs, but like non-professional academics or whatever can get excited about, is important. Yeah. And I think one of the ways he's done that is obviously, like, in so much of the early stuff, talking about film constantly, I think has been really crucial. I think his way of using cinema as a mechanism of both understanding, because sometimes I almost think of what he does is, like, when he uses film, it's the meeting point of, like, the psychoanalytic and the economic, or the Lacanian and the Marxist. And I think that's really effective. And I think it's effective in so much as, to be even more reductive, I think there's a lot of people who maybe connect more with desire as a concept they can grasp onto as a way of understanding. There's others for whom it might be economic concepts. And I think that the way, and I know I'm leaving Hegel out here because I'd maybe argue the thing Zizek not struggles, but it's still hard to get at sometimes is the Hegelian side of things for the more casual reader. But I think bringing the economic and the psychoanalytic together, especially via his readings of cinema, has been just incredibly influential in both introducing ideology, helping people understand it. And I think, and maybe this is where sometimes it gets a little bad, giving people the tools to basically be like, there's an ideology, turning them into little like ideological spotters or something like that with their copy of Sublime Object in their back pocket.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. And I mean, I sometimes even resent that, right? I mean, like I said, I enjoy unironically a lot of those Marvel films, but I've read too much Marxist cultural theory to ever just enjoy them uninhibitedly now. Every time I watch the Avengers, I'm like, oh, yeah, this is kind of like a Jamesonian pastiche, or I have a little Zizek in my head.
Well, everyone's had a movie that Zizek has ruined for, a lot of people grew up with like Titanic as a thing, and then you listen to Zizek once and you're like, they're vampires.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she just sucked them and left them dry. Yeah. And yeah, another thing, I like Titanic a lot, one of my best friends, Dave, is a huge fan of that movie. But I think, generationally.
Sorry, I still can't get over every time you watch The Avengers. How many times have you seen this?
My wife and I like watching it as a comfort film. So I'd say at least like 4 or 5 times, probably. First one.
Okay.
Just so it's not too bad of a pile on, I've absolutely watched that movie that many times as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you want something, I mean, it's not as good as like Terminator 2 or something or Die Hard, but if you want like an entertainment movie that just put on the background and enjoy it, fits that bill very well. But
if you can't afford SSRIs, it's great.
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize, right? I mean, I'm not saying this is like some kind of film snob. Both of those, Terminator 2, Die Hard, those are ones I've rewatched many times, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily watch the Avengers that many times, but all right, let's move on. This is not the thing to focus on.
Sure. Well, no, I just wanted to echo what Michael said initially there. I mean, I must have read Zizek first when I was in 2008, 2009, because my undergraduate dissertation advisor, who was a Marxist and also a huge pothead, who I caught smoking weed all the time, was like, yeah, man, you got to read this. You know what I mean? It's good. It'll blow your mind, right? And I think he gave me like the Sublime Object of Ideology. And yeah, a lot of that, the Hegelian, Lacanese stuff was a little bit much for me at 21. But, the film examples, the religious examples, the jokes, all that really resonated. And I started to think like, well, there really is something to this, right? For me, what he really contributed was this understanding that ideology is a lot more, again, than just false consciousness, right? It's not just an irrational way of apprehending the world, although it can be that, right? And I think nowhere is this better illustrated than, again, a lot of the anecdotes that he gives that really resonate with my experience interacting with people every day. Because he points out, look, in this kind of vulgar Marxist Freudian theory, in order to cure someone of their ideological convictions, you just explain them to them, right? The reason why you feel this way is because you were brought up rich, your dad was a wealthy billionaire, and he always looked down upon you, and that's why you aspire to make billions of dollars now, right? There you go, right?
So like Tony Stark and his dad. Sorry, I had to say it.
Yeah, 100%, right? And what Zizek points out is, if only it was that simple, right? In fact, a lot of the ways that ideology works is so subversive that we can be aware of our own ideological inclinations and yet still act them out, right? I mean, one of the anecdotes he gives is how many times you hear in conversations somebody who will say, yes, I'm aware of the fact that environmental decay is a serious thing, and global warming is real, and capitalism is responsible for it. But, and then they'll follow through with, a whole bunch of reasons why they can't do anything, why it's going to be okay, why the billionaires will save us or whatever. And as we've all learned from watching Game of Thrones, it's everything that comes after the but. That's the more important thing. And I think that's what Zizek really emphasized, right? That curing people of their ideological preconceptions isn't just a matter of explaining them to them or even grounding them in some kind of Oedipal root, if you want to call it that, right? Ideological convictions run a lot deeper than that. And it's really hard to think of how we can kind of draw people out of the matrix, to use the expression, right? As he puts it in a famous metaphor, it's not as simple even as saying, take the red pill rather than the blue pill. What we really need is the third pill that will explain the reason why the matrix exists from the beginning, and the way that it why it is that so many people are attached to it.
Yeah. So I guess that again, I do think that a lot of this is interesting and insightful. I'm not a Lacan guy, but Zizek and Mark Fisher are the two people who,
I'm just going to do the Freud thing, Ben, and say that the reason why you're so reserved about this is you're aware that this method is so probing that it's unleashing and unmasking a lot of your own ideological inclinations. You're being defensive about it, right?
Oh, fair enough. Yeah. So, but those are the two guys who can consistently make me, think that there's something like really important and insightful here, with some of these Lacanian concepts when I read them, and whatever. I love, like Hitchcock movies. I like watching, Zizek talk about Hitchcock movies. And again, not for nothing. I think there are like a lot of what the guy has to say is a sort of both cultural commentator and just kind of a commentator on like immediate politics is really useful and I think the left would benefit from listening to. I guess my concern is, and maybe this like puts a little bow on a whole discussion to kind of like go back to where we started, is about how much emphasis to put on ideology in the first place, right? So one of the so a couple of years ago, Zizek did a debate with a guy, Marxist academic I really like named Vivek Chibber. We actually did a breakdown of it on this channel, although I think it's not a very good breakdown because I should have, I hadn't read enough that was relevant yet to like totally understand what the issue and dispute was. I think that one, but like the thing that sort of differentiates those two guys is about, again, how to think about the relative importance of ideology. So there's this whole tradition going back to, people like Adorno, you were mentioning earlier, when you're talking about the fleeing patrons, who are, where you sort of say, okay, Marxism has this material analysis of economic structures, and even if that's correct as far as it goes, if you really want to understand, like, okay, how is it that my God, right? We're in the we're like Capital was published 158 years ago, right? And we're still living under small c capital, right? The like why is this system persisted so much? And there's a way of answering that question that sort of says, okay, well, even if the sort of basic Marxist structural economic analysis is right, if you want to answer questions like this, you need to sort of bring in culture and ideology to supplement that. And so Chibber, in a book that's called The Class Matrix, although I don't really think that's supposed to be a reference to the movie, as a makes this really interesting point about all this is, okay, but hold on, the sort of foundational reason for thinking that there's this like hole in the economic analysis you need to fill in with all the stuff about culture and ideology is thinking that the economic analysis is going to predict working class revolt. But let's think a little bit harder about this, because if you're just kind of thinking about class interests in the aggregate, right? Like what's in the interest of the working class as a whole, it's very easy to see how that you could say, okay, what's in the interest of the working class is resisting at the very least pushing for reforms, getting rid of capitalism entirely. But if you zoom into, okay, what's in the interests of individual working class people, it's a lot more complicated because of collective action problems that the actual risk reward matrix for any individual person does not necessarily favor resistance to the status quo. That there's a lot to lose from resistance to the status quo. I mean, if you get involved in a union organizing drive, you could lose your job. If if you go on strike, you could the company might just close down your workplace entirely. If you march on the Winter Palace to demand all power to the Soviets, right? You might be massacred, or you might win, but that means that your country is economically isolated and to the world and all this, right? And so it's actually pretty rational, right? Given that you don't know how many people are going to join you, whatever, it's pretty rational to keep your head down and pursue individual level solutions to your problems. Try to get as far ahead as you can, or at least help your children to do so, rather than taking those kinds of risks.
But then he argues that that's not an ideological construct, more of a practical, rational outcome.
I just want to interject by saying I have to go because unfortunately I texted the mayor and he's not going to delay the fireworks on my account, right?
Okay.
And, I might as well just jump off a bridge if we don't go see these because that's the last you'll hear me.
Okay, well, I don't want to be responsible for the end of the McManus marriage, so I will take a minute to wrap up with Michael. But Matt, you are at liberty.
Thank you. I'll feel bad about it though. Don't worry. All right, sit.
Okay.
Later, yeah. I got a few minutes. I'm here until the wife and kid get home. So
nice.
Good to see you, Michael. By the way, we'll chat again soon. Bye.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm just curious because I haven't read his work really at that level, so I'm curious.
Yeah, right. So the move would be, it's saying, okay, rather than saying because what we're usually saying, we say ideology is that you have this false idea of the world, right? This idea of the world that's not caused by the way it actually is, but it's by some kind of specious rationalization of it or illusion about it, whatever. But in this case, you say no, this actually is individually very rational, right? I mean, it's you're not mistaken thinking that there are these tremendous risks that are involved here, or that sort of weighing how many people are going to join you, how what the most likely outcomes are. There are actually good reasons not to want to do that in any individual case. And so the move would be to say, look, maybe we actually have to reverse it for the sort of Frankfurt School kind of thing, where you say, okay, Marxist economic analysis can account for working class resistance, but then you need to bring in all the stuff about culture and ideology to make sense of working class non-resistance, and say, no, it's the other way around, that they have once we think about people's positions, even the stuff Marxist class analysis says about people's positions in the class structure, once we zoom into the individual level, right, those claims about how class structure work can actually explain working class non-resistance just fine by themselves, if anything, right? We need to bring in culture and ideology to explain working class resistance. How is it that we ever get a successful workers movement at all? And that the sort of building, some kind of solidaristic ethos that that gets people to take these risks is this huge cultural accomplishment. Whenever it happends, and maybe in the absolute best case scenario, you get this kind of virtuous circle where you kind of manage to build up enough solidaristic culture that you get people to take certain kinds of risks, and then that helps you win certain kinds of victories, and then that maybe once you put some points on the board, that helps change the individual risk reward calculations, right? That would be the that would be the best case scenario, but it's also really, really hard, which is one of the reasons why most of the time, I mean, you're not going to go broke betting against the success of the left or the workers' movement.
Yeah, I mean, well, it does sound too like that makes me think of, the rise of individualism more broadly, and to use the I word again, not individualism, the ideology, like the ideology of individualism, because of course, in what you're describing there, of course, if I exist in a framework where the way I view the world is fundamentally just a bunch of like self-interested actors, I'm going to conceive of things through the lens of like, well, unionizing could be cool, but here's, I'll play the next 3 steps out, and there's a 70% chance that if I do that, it negatively affects me. So, then I guess the question is still, to me, at least, like an ideological one of how do we account? Can we ideologically account for that? Like the forces that lead to that level of individualism, and wouldn't that? And I did not. And it was the Zizek, and is it Chibber? Am I saying his name right? Right. Is that debate? Is there a video of that? Because I want to watch this.
Yeah, there totally is. If you just look up those,
because I'm just curious. I'm imagining in my head like what the Zizekian response would be to what you just articulated. So I'm curious.
Yeah, it's
what you're saying makes sense in this really practical way. But there's a Slovenian man in my head that's yelling some stuff.
Yeah. No, it was on the Jacobin YouTube channel.
Oh, okay.
I want to say in like.
Okay, I think I found. I'm gonna watch this later. This is my
2023, something like that. I don't remember exactly, but
okay, yeah.
Yeah. So it's and they end up. I will also say that Zizek, in some ways, in debates, oftentimes tends to get not very debatey and to sort of like focus on areas of agreement and to sort of joke around. I mean, like in some ways that's like I'm actually in some ways like
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, like this is a classic example. This is like the Zizek Peterson debate, which is like I think the reason, part of the reason it went so well for Zizek is that he just seemed extremely chill, and Peterson, sort of seemed to sabotage himself a lot over the course of it. So like, the actual like Zizek pushback at certain points was just kind of like, I mean, I guess there's like a few things where he like, he made some like sharp critical points. He did the thing where he asked if he could list off the postmodern neo-Marxists, but like, for the most part, it was just kind of Zizek, like, chilling and telling jokes and making connections between things, and Peterson kind of tripping over his own shoelaces. And so for that reason, it worked out really well. But like, oftentimes, I think when Zizek shows up to other kinds of debates and does the same kind of stuff, sometimes you can leave it and think, wait a second, what were they debated?
Okay, all right, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, but that's interesting to me, because again, it's one of those things like hearing that position is one of those ones, and I'm Zizekian in that in general. Like any idea that's conveyed in good faith, I'm like, oh yeah, I could see that. Like that makes sense to me. So it makes sense, and I see how that could be a convincing argument. I still just would worry that there's maybe a risk in getting so practically focused that we are not thinking about sets of ideological conditions. At the same time, I also understand that maybe one of the worst parts about ideology, and especially in terms of if it's an idea you, let's say, have learned recently, maybe it's a thing where you go, oh, so that's the root cause of X, Y, and Z. So we just got to change that. And then you read more and talk to people, and you're like, wait, so there's no way I can do that. So we can't just go to the ideology store and like put a different disk in the drive. And I think that can feel politically deflating to an extent. And maybe that gets back to the point that Matt was making earlier about the Zizekian analysis of people that care about the climate and yet are going to drive their car to the airport or something like that. That maybe that is a hard point to land at with some of this. And like you said, if it's like it's maybe easier to think in smaller practical terms than, all we got to do is change the economic and material conditions of society so people can think differently. And even I think a good example against that would be like Thatcher, who doesn't get enough credit for being an ideological thinker, because Thatcher's whole thing was just we're going to change the soul of a people. We are going to, create a political world that's going to change the souls of an island of folks. And, it didn't work.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seemed like it worked for a while, right? I mean, what's the sort of there's a classic quote from Thatcher after she left office where she was asked what her greatest accomplishment was, and she said New Labor, right? In other words, the that even the Labor Party had adopted.
No, it's not wrong.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, look, in a certain sense, I mean, I kind of want to believe that everything's about ideology, because it's because that would make people like me feel important, right? I come from a philosophy background. I mean, the initial thing I did in the Michael Brooks show is called The Debunk, right? I have a if whole thing is arguing about ideas, that sounds awesome, right? That's the thing that's important and driving everything. I mean, at least assuming that you can. I mean, as you said, I mean, you could also, if you have a version of these ideas about ideology where you just say you can't swap out the hard drive or whatever, then maybe not, right? But if you but in a certain sense, I mean, I'd love to think that criticizing ideology was the most important thing. I mean, it's kind of deflating when it's oh, actually, wait a second, maybe left-wing podcasters and philosophy professors are less important than union organizers.
No, no, but I think that's true. That's one of the issues, and I think you kind of see it sometimes with philosophical and left intellectual digital spaces. It can sometimes be, I guess, an ideological analysis dick measuring contest of sort of who's doing the best at analyzing ideology, who's doing the best at saying, actually, here's what's going on here, and it feels satisfying. And yet at the end of that, we're kind of sitting there and now what? So I think, I don't know, for me, that's the thing that I think is both frustrating and interesting to think about, because then it raises the question of what do we do with this? If someone is both interested in thinking about ideology from a philosophical perspective, but also wants to use it to inform some form of action or strategy, what do you do there? I have no idea, but it's an interesting question.
Well, fair enough. We'll have to try to sort that out we'll do the next episode. We'll do half of it will be about that question, and half of it will be arguing about whether MCU movies are too long.
Yes. Okay. Just making sure that was the second part. Okay, great.
Yeah. All right. Michael, I see your videos on YouTube all the time, but where can other people find them if they're curious?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube under my name, Michael Burns, and then on all the social medias, just under my name, or Michael Burns or Michael O. Burns. So feel free to come by, and thank you so much for having me, Ben. Someone who I feel like for a long time we should have talked like this. So it's very fun to do this. So thanks to Matt for setting this up and getting it going. And at some point, if you ever are free, come over to my digital house and talk about ideas sometime.
I would love to, anytime.
Awesome.
All right, man. Thanks so much for coming on. That was Michael Burns. I should check out his channel. There is a link to that in the description below you. Meantime, we are going to go to the post game for patrons, which normally I say, when I say this, I say that if you're a patron, you should have a link to that already in your inbox. I guess now, as of the end of that sentence, this is true because I literally just pressed post on Patreon while I was in the middle of saying that sentence. But you should be getting that email. Certainly, if you just go to patreon.com/Ben Burgess, you can find it there. You can also go to the same place if you have been living your life wrong and you're not a patron. and this is the day that you want to make things right, you can go over there, and for $5 a month, get access to every patron exclusive post game, access to the Discord server. Sometimes we'll release stuff early to patrons, et cetera, but really, again, all of these are ways of saying thank you. This is audience supported content. We don't nobody here is paid in any way other than that. So yeah, if you like what we do, you want to keep it going, please do consider doing that. But in the post game, we might follow up on a couple threads that we had to let go for the sake of time in the opening segment of the main show, but we will also continue our long march through Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists, which for some reason we seem to be very committed to watching every bit of. I'm not really sure why, but that is what we're doing. So I will see you guys in the post game if you are a patron. Otherwise, I will see you next week when Matt is going to be back along with some other contributors to a book called Flowers for Marx that is coming out. But if you are a patron, I will see you in about 1 minute in the post game. Left is best.